Okay, guys, if you're just coming back, I apologize, but remember, I'm a mom first, I'm a wife first, and then I am this second and third. Okay. Because we kind of got cut off from that, I'm going to start in the same place again so that it's cohesive, so I don't just have to upload like that little halfling little thing later. So what we are talking about is the Mandate for Leadership, the 2020-2025 project. I am reading it out loud, and we are currently on page 108. We have gone through all of this context up until then, and if you're joining us here in your live, welcome if you're here for the first time, and if you're not, welcome back. I'm also over on Twitter Spaces live at the same time simultaneously, but don't worry, if you can't listen now, I will upload this later to YouTube so that you can listen at your leisure. And again, I get it's usually like 2 hours, and that's a really long time. But I also, the following day, will do a summary that will be in my playlist here on TikTok. You can find the link in my bio, and we'll go from there because I just want to get this out as to many people as possible. So read it live, here, TikTok, listen on Twitter Space. I'll upload it to YouTube later, and then later on I will also do a summary. So we're going to get right back into it because I only got like 2 pages in, but let's take a drink. Hydrate and caffeinate, so I'm saying, you know what I mean? So what we were talking about are the 4 branches of government. We're doing the U.S. Army, Marine Corps, and we're doing the Navy. Excuse me. Woo. So they're going through U.S. Navy, U.S. Army, U.S. Marine Corps, and Air Force. And they're talking about what they see, what their expectation is, and what that looks like going forward. So we're going to start with U.S. Army again. And again, guys, I am not a professional. These are my opinions. I will read this. My commentary is my own. I will botch words. I will botch names. We're just trying to get through it. So let's start off again. U.S. Army. Okay? Everybody stretch. Turn to the right. Turn to the left. Praise. Okay. U.S. Army. The U.S. Army's mission is to deploy, fight, and win our nation's wars by providing ready, prompt, and sustained land dominance by Army forces across the full spectrum of conflict as a part of joint forces. Today, however, the Army cannot execute its land dominance mission. The U.S. Army, the U.S. Army is an inflection point that is marked by more than a decade of steadily eroding budgets and diluted buying power, an appreciable degradation in readiness and training capacity, and a near crisis in recruiting and retention of critical personnel. This is a bevy of aging weapons system that no longer provides quantitative edge over peer and near-peer competitors, but will not be replaced in the near term. All of these challenges are set against the backdrop of a complex and dynamic global geopolitical environment that is exemplified and exacerbated by the triumph of our adversaries in Afghanistan after a 20-year struggle there, as well as recent outrages in the Ukraine and China's bellicosity both on its borders and its surrounding disputed regions. Again, guys, I know this sounds a lot like stereo instructions, and for whatever reason, the authors of this Project 2025 have run-on sentences that give me a fucking migraine. So I will try to use inflection points when I can, but sometimes literally an entire paragraph long it's going to be a whole paragraph of just, remember, it's 920 pages. Some will say 922. I printed off 920. That's the print job that I had done. And a lot of this is meant to, I believe, confuse because it's very dry. It's very, but then you'll get to that one point that you'll hear something and go, wait a minute, it doesn't sound quite right. Let's read that again. So, all of these challenges are set for the status quo further being marked by pervasive, politically driven, top-down focus on progressive and social policies that emphasize matters like so-called diversity, equity, inclusion, and climate change. They're trying to say that we have an issue with our U.S. Army simply because of DEI and climate change. and LGBTQIA plus communities. That's where they're saying the downfall is, which is, this is batshit crazy. It is often a determinant of the Army's core warfighting mission. So here's where they talk about the needed reforms. Rebuild the Army. The total Army budget has decreased by roughly 11% since 2018, perilously affecting the service's readiness and ability to train and procure new personnel and equipment. Declining budgets and decreased buying power have forced the Army to lower training standards and opportunities to train, propose reductions in its end strength, slash military construction programs to historically low levels, and scale back essential modernization programs. So here is what they are saying they need to do to rebuild the Army. Number one, increase the Army budget to remain the world's preeminent land power. Number two, accelerate the development and procurement of the 6 current Army modernization priorities: long-range precision fires, the next generation combat vehicle, future vertical lift, the Army network, air and missile defense, and soldier lethality, to replace a worn-out and outdated combat system and ensure ground combat dominance. Increasing funding to improve Army training and operation readiness is number 3. Number 4, increase the Army force structure by 50,000 to handle 2 major regional contingencies simultaneously. Number 5, reform recruiting efforts. The Army missed its 2022 recruitment goal by 25%, or roughly 15,000 soldiers. Focus on deployability and sustained operations. The U.S. Army's very lethal ground force capability is irrelevant if it cannot quickly deploy to locations for employment in decisive operations to secure our global security interests. Additionally, Army logistics, I'm not going to say logisticians, it always does not roll off my tongue right. Army logic people provide the ground transportation of both personnel and equipment, fuel, food, water, and munitions, bomb and bullets, medical supplies and services, and veterinary services. Food safety. Veterinary services for food safety? It just sounds weird, but medical supplies and services and veterinary services are kind of lumped into one. Those are critical to the sustainment of other services. Number 1, immediately increase the production of stockpiling of critical munitions and repair parts. Number 2, prioritize expendatory logistics in all force design of an operational planning to guarantee entry into a contested theater of war. Number 3, increase the level of joint force training, synchronization, and coordination focused on logistics. Number 4, prepare to deploy forces from degraded U.S.-based transportation infrastructure that is compromised by opposing forces. Okay, transform Army culture and training. The Army can no longer serve as the nation's social testing ground. A rebuilt Army that is focused again on its core warfighting mission and empowered it with tools, resources, and authority is needed to accomplish that mission, and it must be the next administration's highest defense priority. Number 1, stop using the Army as a test bed for social evolution. Misusing the Army in a way that detracts from its core purpose while doing little to reshape the American structure, the Army can no longer reflect the national demographics to the degree that it did before 1974 when the draft was eliminated. So if you're joining us, that's what they're referring to. They're saying it's down so far that what we actually need is to instill the draft again. And I've said this many times. Okay, so you want to instill the draft again, but you want to exclude any member of the LGBTQIA plus community. You don't want DEI hires per se. Gen Z is not going to sign up for this. So if you have some kind of draft situation that you think is going to go on in your mind, that's not going to happen. They're not going to go to endless wars for when they come back. They're not going to be taken care of. It's as simple as that. Number 2, demand accountability in senior leaders to reverse the decline in public support for military service. Number 3, reestablish the experimental base for the planning, execution, and leadership of the Army formations in a large-scale operation. Currently, there are no general or general field grade officers who served as planners or commanders against a near peer adversary in combat. So they're saying that there's a lack of generals. Well, we can thank Tommy Tuberville for some of that bullshit, right? I mean, there's a lack because there may be people who, should have gone up in rank, but no. 4, examine the logical emerging of Army concepts about employed, masked, long-range fires and effects without considering how to gain advantage by closing with and dominating on an adversary land. Number 5, recognize that high-intensity land combat operations cannot be sustained through short-term individual or unit rotations in the style of the sustained low-intensity campaigns conducted over the past 20 years. Number 6, transform how the National Guard is employed during extended operations short of declared war to preclude back to the federal and state deployments of the National Guard soldiers in order to stabilize and preserve military volunteerism in our communities. Number 7, revamp Army school curricula to concentrate on preparation for large-scale land operations that focus on defeating peer threats. Number 8, address the underlying casual issues driving increasing Army suicide rates, which have surpassed pre-World War II rates and are now eclipsing the rate among civilians. So they're saying right here, and I highlighted that last time that we were talking about that, they're saying that Army suicide rates are higher. Why might they be higher? Because people are not being taken care of after they come home from stressful situations because they themselves were like, you know what, I want to serve my country, but when I came back, they absolutely shit on me, and I've been hurt, I've been disabled, I have CTPSD, I have PTSD, and I can't be taken care of. So that's why those rates are higher. Those rates are higher because after World War II, we didn't have it. We went on to Vietnam. And now they're saying the Army suicide rates have surpassed pre-World War II rates. Pre-World War II. That is the emphasis. So every war that we've had since World War II, the rates are increasing. So that's what they plan to do on the U.S. Army front. On the U.S. Navy, here's where it's referring to what its reforms are and where it thinks it is. As noted at the beginning of this chapter, the U.S. Constitution gives Congress the power to provide and maintain a Navy. Inherent in this phase is a recognition that there is a vital national interest in maritime environment and that the national interest requires sustained planning and investment. This is as true today as it was almost 250 years ago and will remain true in the future. The U.S. Navy, USN, exists for 2 primary reasons: to protect, prompt, sustained, and effective combat power globally, both at sea and ashore, and to deter aggression by potential adversaries by maintaining a forward operating presence in conjunction with allies and partners. Today, the People's Republic of China People's Liberation Army Navy Plan, or the PLAN, can challenge the USN's ability to accomplish its mission in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. In the production of employment and control of maritime forces, the USN must consider the scope and rate of technological change and, where appropriate, adapt its processes and workforce development. In balancing the necessary long-term industrial model of naval platforms against an emerging short-term opportunity, the USN must take account of advances that may present vulnerabilities and risks, as well as what is assured and secure. So, here's where they say the needed reforms are. Invest in and expand force structure. The USN's organizing principle remains platform-centered, vessels manned by sailors. The manned surface and subsurface forces act in concert with land-based, air-based, and space-based forces to protect power outside sovereign territory, principally by operating in international waters. Investments must be closely coordinated with these other elements of military power. Number 1, build a fleet of more than 355 ships. Number 2, develop and field unmanned systems to augment the manned forces. Number 3, require that range and lethality be the key factors in all procurement and sustainment decisions for ships, aircraft, and munitions. Reestablish the General Board. In contrast with the Navy General Board that served ship development so well during their interwar period and the current joint process for defining the requirements for major defense acquisitions is not well suited to long-term planning of the sort that is needed for the USN fleet architects and shipbuilding. The Interwar General Board should serve as a model, empowered with final decision authority over all requirements and documents concerning ships and major defense systems fielded on those ships. The individual board members would ensure a broad base of knowledge as well as independent thinking. Establish a Rapid Capabilities Office. The USN must transition technology into a warfighting capability more rapidly. It must foster a culture of innovation that includes connecting theoretical and intangible ideas with real production environments that produce tangible and practical outcomes, and adapting proven processes to advance material solutions. Whew. Everybody take a drink. That was a lot. Oh, I see you guys. By the way, I thank you for the gifts. That's amazing. It is never expected. It is always appreciated. I am see them coming through. I apologize if I'm not recognizing everybody at that moment, but I am reading. I am seeing it, and I do appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, number 1. Harness innovation and willingness to tolerate risk so that good enough systems can be fielded rapidly. It's good enough. Yep, it'll do. She'll do in a pinch. Harness innovation and willingness to tolerate risk so that good enough systems can be fielded rapidly. Explain to me how good enough systems are needed to be performed rapidly when you want to build 355 ships, when you want the budget to be bigger. I just, maybe it's me, maybe it's Maybelline. Why would you say good enough and then demand that we up production levels, we up budget, we increase all of this, but good enough will have to do until? Number 2, use the Space Development Agency as a model. That sounds like that's going into Elon territory just a little too much. When you keep reading more about like Space Force and satellites and stuff like that, it's a little like I kind of see where you got some of your subsidy. I see where you got your tax breaks from, just a little bit. Number 3, establish an oversight board of directors made up of the service chief, service secretary, and undersecretary of defense for acquisition and sustainment. And that was page 111, guys. On to page 112. Accelerate the purchase of key munitions. It takes years to build and maintain navies, but only hours to expend their ordnance in combat. The USN must be prepared to expend large quantities of air-launched and sea-launched stealthily precision cruise missiles against targets both at sea and ashore. Additionally, modern air defense requires the use of high-performance services to air missiles. Number 1, produce key munitions at the maximum rate with significant capacity. Why are we stockpiling the maximum? Number 2, working with Congress, employ the widest possible range of techniques to enhance the munitions supply chains and workforce. Why do we need the maximums if we're not at war? Why do we have to have all of that and then expand it into Congress to make sure that those expand into infrastructure, into actually having, I don't know, the supply, why do you need such a wide supply chain and use of resources if we're not at war? I understand maintaining, but maximum? Enhance warfighter development. The USN requires a variety of documented qualifications for personnel to advance in their careers and assume leadership positions. It also requires individual professional qualifications that are focused on war fighting. Number 1, mandate qualifications that demonstrate an understanding of core competence in collective, integrated war fighting, especially based on current plans and technologies. Oh, I thought we were going back to just it's good enough. So it's good enough. We want maximum munition at all times, and now we're just gonna be like, well, we need to just focus on current plans and technologies. Number 2, elevate the headquarters staff focused on warfighter development, the N7, with the Office of Chief of Naval Operations, OPNAV, and empower it to develop such requirements. Number 3, require that war games be utilized as experimental learning environments for the participants as a prerequisite for achieving career milestones. Department heads, commanding officers, and major commanders. So you want people who you want to promote, you want promotions, but you want them to require that war games be utilized? I'm sorry, is this Matthew Broderick? Why is this happening? Highlight number 4 in training the leader development that the USN forces can and must maintain the ability to operate from and or defend sovereign territory to include our allies and partners. Number 5, try to balance effects from kinetic and non-kinetic, from lethal to non-lethal, through the effective command and control. That's a lot of words, Alan. Okay, so that's their plan for the Navy. All right. U.S. Air Force. The U.S. Air Force today lacks a force structure with lethality, survivability, and capacity to fight major conflict with a great power like China. It all comes back to China, and you'll see this. It should deter nuclear threats and meet its other operational requirements under the National Defense Strategy. For 30 years, the Air Force has received less annual funding, if pass-through funding defined as money in the Air Force budget that does not have to go to the Air Force is removed from the equation, than the Army and Navy have received. This underfunding has forced the Air Force to cut its forces and forego modernizing aging weapon systems that were never designed to operate in a current threat environment and are structurally and mechanically exhausted. The result is an Air Force that is the oldest, smallest, and least ready in history. I would bet that the Air Force has something to say about that, as to, first of all, why? Second of all, try me. Like, okay, if it's the weakest, why did you, as Congress, as our government, allow that to happen? Just crazy. The decline in Air Force capacity and capability is occurring at the same time that the security environment demands the very options that the Air Force uniquely provides. Combatant commanders routinely request more Air Force capabilities than the service has the capacity to provide. The Air Force today simply cannot accomplish all of the missions it's required to perform. The Air Force has consistently stated that on official record it is not sized to meet the mission demands placed on the various U.S. combatant commands, a 2018 study showed. The Air Force we need showed the 24% deficit in Air Force capacity to meet the needs of the National Defense Strategy. Those conclusions remain valid and are more pronounced today because of subsequent aircraft retirements. The demand is also higher because of world events. To understand these trends, one needs only to consider that the Air Force's future 5-year budget plan retires 1,463 aircraft while buying just 467. This makes for a reduction of 996 aircraft by 2027. The net result is a force that is smaller, older, and less ready at the time when the demand is on burgeoning. So, we're going to have less Air Force actual plane aircraft. So they want to ramp that way up. Needed reforms. Increase spending and budget accuracy in line with threat-based strategy. Returning to the U.S. military to a force that can achieve deterrence or win in a fight if necessary requires returning to a threat-based defense strategy. Real budget growth combined with more equitable distribution of resources across the armed services is the only realistic way to create a modernized Air Force with the capacity to meet the needs of the national defense strategy. Additionally, as noted above, pass-through funding causes number cited of current DoD budget documents to be higher than dollar amounts actually received by the Air Force. Number 1, adopt a two-war force defense strategy with scenarios for each service that allow the Air Force to attain the resources it requires by developing a force sizing construct that reflects with what is required to accomplish strategic objectives. So a two-war, okay. Eliminate pass-through funding, which has grown to more than $40 billion per year and has caused the Air Force to be chronically underfunded for decades. Number 3, increase the Air Force budget by 5% annually after adjusting for inflation to reverse the decline in size, age, and readiness and facilitate the transition to a more modern, lethal, and survivable force. Reduce near-term and mid-term risk. Increasing the Air Force's acquisition of the next generation capabilities that are either soon or will be in production will increase the ability of the United States to deter and defeat near-term to mid-term threats. Number 1, increase F-3A procurement from 60 to 80 per year. Number 2, build the capacity for a B-1 production at the rate of 15 to 18 aircraft per year, along with applicable elements of the B-21 long-range strike family of systems. Number 3, increase Air Force airlift and aerial refueling capacity to support agile combat employment operations that generate combat sorties from a highly dispersed posture in both Europe and the Pacific. Number 4, develop and buy larger quantities of advanced mid-range weapons, 50 nm to 200 nm, that are sized to maximize targets for stealth aircraft flying in a contested environments against targets that could exceed 100,000 aim points. Number 5, accelerate the development and production of the Sentinel intercontinental ballistic missile to reduce the risk inherent in aging Minuteman III force in light of China's nuclear modernization breakout. Number 6, increase the number of EC-37B electronic warfare from 10 to 20 in order to achieve minimum capacity to engage growing threats from China across the electromagnetic spectrum. So all this and I keep seeing this throughout this chapter, and when you see, because I did read something before I even printed this off, I saw something because I wasn't quite sure what it was, and I want to understand. This all comes back to China. Everything, what they're talking about, it's China, it's China, it's China, and I look at it and go, okay, but if we go to war with anybody else, it's all about the Chinese threat. But again, a lot of this that's in here probably could have been more of a deterrent if certain, former presidents didn't hide things in the shitter. Okay, maybe we didn't have to have as many capabilities or build as much because our secrets weren't just being handed out. Invest in future Air Force programs and efforts. Increased capable adversaries require new capabilities to enable victory against those adversaries. Number 1, attain an operational optimized advanced battle management system and as the Air Force implement of the DoD Joint All-Domain Command and Control Enterprise. Number 2, produce the next generation air dominance system of systems. Air moving target indication, other sensors, communication, command and control, weapons, and uninhabited aerial vehicles. Number 3, achieve moving target engagement capability and capacity against sea, surface, ground, and mobile targets at the scale necessary to meet the needs of the National Defense Strategy. Number 4, build resilient basing, sustainment, and communications for survivability in contested environments. Number 5, establish a vigorous and sufficiently funded electromagnetic spectrum operations recovery plan to make up for the more than 20 years of neglect in this mission area. So that's what they're saying. That's what they want, as what they're saying is needed reform just the Air Force. Now, we're going to talk about the Marine Corps. And this one is where I started to have I was like, what is this? I was curious as to what this meant. So, the U.S. Marine Corps, the USMC, is the Maritime Land Force, the Department of Defense Department of the Navy. It serves critical role as the expeditious amphibious force that can project power from sea to shore and beyond while performing other specialized missions like securing America's diplomat outposts abroad. Between the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 and the conclusion of the U.S. military operations in Afghanistan in August 2022, the Marine Corps engaged in extended operations as ashore as directed by the Secretary of Defense, leaving it with little opportunity or ability to train for and execute the naval amphibious operations for which it is uniquely suited and directed by law. This lengthy divergence from its primary mission led to a deep concern that the Corps had become the Second Land Army, prompting senior Marine Corps leaders to push for service return to sea. In addition, the USMC spent nearly 2 decades fighting counter-insurgency wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, developed capabilities that were specifically geared to those to fight, but have limited utility in scenarios involving evenly matched and advanced enemies or amphibious operations that are necessary for project of naval power. As a result, Marine Corps Commandant General David H. Berger developed and began to implement Force Design 230. That's the one that I was curious about. Like, what is Force Design 230? So, Force Design 230, as I'm reading, is designed to prepare the Marine Corps for a naval war against China. That's literally what it is. Force Design literally says, if you Google it, Force Design is designed to prepare the Marine Corps for a naval war against China. No one else, but this is what they're calling Force Design. So, in April 2022, I was just reading this, again, Wikipedia, Google is free. Retired Marine Corps generals oppose it. It says it is too focused on the Pacific places because it would take small groups and put them in remote areas and then be unable to resupply them. So all these little Pacific islands that you would want to station Marine Corps in for, will it be wartime, whether it be peacetime, whatever it would be, there would not be the capability to sustain all of these individuals on all of these remote islands. And that's why generals are like, you're too focused on the Pacific. When we're talking about the Marine Corps, it's the whole world. So that you're focused specifically on the Pacific, specifically China and or other underlying regions that you would want to put our force there. Generals are like, no, you've got to come up with a better plan. So, a plan, if completed, would be the most radical transformation of the Marine Corps since World War II. The successful implementation of this force design, coupled with reforms in the Marine Corps personnel system and the Navy's amphibious shipbuilding plans, will be critical to ensuring the Corps' future combat effectiveness. So again, they're going back to Force Design 2030. I'm assuming that's the year when they want to implement all of that. But again, Force Design is meant against China only. No other enemies, foreign or domestic. This is against China, and generals are just like, no, this is not good. So needed reforms is what they're referring to in Project 2025. Divest systems to implement the Force of 2030 transformation. Divesting equipment that is less relevant to distributed, low-signature operation in a contested maritime environment will make funds available for modernization. Okay, so you want to stick people, again, in remote islands, give them absolutely shit, let them survive, and they'll just be like, what? And then when they can't get it because you need more information and more, funds available for modernization, but not for people that you've placed in Pacific Islands? Like, make it make sense. Okay, number 1. Transform the USMC force structure. A. Eliminate all USMC law enforcement battalions. That sounds bad. B. Transform at least one Marine infantry regiment into a Marine, I don't even know this word, so I'm going to try to say it. Is it littoral regiment? So it's saying transform from at least one Marine infantry regiment into a Marine littoral regiment. Infantry to littoral. Okay. C. Reduce the size of remaining infantry battalions. How do you reduce the size if you want more people in areas where there isn't war to not get supplies that they need for modernization that you want? Okay. Number 2. Divest systems or equipment that are better suited to heavier U.S. Army units. A. Maintain divestment of the M1 Abrams tanks. B. Eliminate the majority of tube artillery M777 batteries. C. Reduce the number of advanced amphibious assault vehicles and the number of their replacements. Am I the only one that is hearing we need more amphibious, and now it's saying we need less amphibious? Like we need more aircraft but less amphibious, but now somehow more amphibious? Again, is it designed to confuse? Number 3, use funds made available by divestment of systems to support new systems that are geared to be the likely needs of future conflicts. A. Increase the number of rocket artillery batteries, the HIMARSs. B. Increase the number of upgraded light armored vehicles, LAV companies. C. Increase the number of unmanned aerial systems and anti-air systems, including counter-UAS systems. D. Develop long-range strike missiles and anti-ship missiles for the Corps. E. Modernize USMC infantry equipment. Transform the USMC personnel paradigm. More than other services, the USMC relies heavily on junior non-commissioned officers, NCOs, to staff key positions across the force, but especially in combat arms. For example, E4s routinely hold squad leader billets when the Army normally has an E6 in those billets. The nature of more distributed operations and increasingly complex responsibilities of the Marine Corps Rifle Squad and Platoon under Force Design 230 will only put more responsibility on the backs of squad leaders and platoon sergeants, increasing the need for more senior Marines in those critical positions. Additionally, the Corps needs to improve its retention of junior NCOs after their first enlistment. The Marines have much lower rates of enlistment than other branches. And again, ask yourself why they have lower rates of reenlistment. Because they're not taken care of. You see how this all goes into just a bullshit cycle? Like, you want retention, you want people to reenlist, but you want to spend it on all of not the manpower, you want to spend it on things. And you know people are retiring. Bunch of boomers at some point are going to start retiring, and the force is not going to be equal because Gen Z is not going to go into the draft, and when all of these boomers start to retire, we're kind of going lopsided. So you're trying to put it into things like that are just going to be what? Like you said, war games. I do not need AI, but we can take drones apparently. Number 1, align the USMC's combat arms rank structure with the U.S. Army's. Squad leader billets for E6 and platoon sergeant billets for E7. I am not going to pretend to know what half this shit means, but it doesn't sound good. Align. Number 2, create better incentives to retain talented junior NCOs, especially in infantry and other critical military occupational specialties. And again, in my brain, I hear, well, there was a bunch of promotions that were supposed to happen that were held up because of abortion, because of Tommy Tuberville. How do you maintain incentives and retain junior NCOs when they're looking up to their staff rank and they're not getting promoted after they've served there for 20 years? Like, If why should you try to retain me? Because I'm what? Just a body to you? Reduce unnecessary deployments to increase dwell time in order to enable more robust primary military education. Okay, so reducing unnecessary deployments simply means they probably want to spend more on equipment than people. Align Navy amphibious shipbuilding with Force Design 230, right here. So they want an amphibious Navy for Design 230 so that they can rally against China. You see it, like, the U.S. Navy has struggled for decades to maintain an amphibious fleet that could support the USMC war plans around large-scale amphibious operations. In addition, amphibious shipbuilding has often led to compete against other priorities within a constrained budget and limited shipbuilding capacity. Number one, develop and produce light amphibious warships, LAWs, to support more distributed amphibious operations, especially in the Pacific. What did I tell you? It all comes back to China. It all comes back to this Force Design 230. They want to create as much force as they can around the Pacific, around China, that they can. But they're not talking about anywhere else in the world. They're talking about Marines here, naval here. Let's see. Maintain between 28 and 31 larger amphibious warships as opposed to the 25 specified in current Navy shipbuilding plans and the 38 specified before 2020. Okay, take a drink. Now on to U.S. Space Force. So we have U.S. Space Force, U.S. Cyber Command, nuclear deterrence, missile defense, and the needed reforms. I think we can get through this. Yep. The U.S. Space Forces conduct global space operations to sustain and enhance air, land, and sea effectiveness, lethality, and superiority by providing secure, broadband global communications, precision position, navigation, and timing accuracy, attacks against warning and threat tracking and targeting capability, real-time intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance information, and their assured continuity of operations of both defending the U.S. assets by conducting offensive operations that are capable of imposing unacceptable losses on adversaries that might seek to attack them. What have I said? Commas are your friend. Punctuation is okay. The U.S. Space Force, the USSF, was established to ensure continuous global theater combat support from space, to deter against U.S. attack space assets, and to prevail in space should deterrence fail. The USSF posture was conceived as a balance of offensive and defensive deterrent capabilities designed for maximum effectiveness. So here are the needed reforms. Reverse the Biden administration defense posture. The Biden administration has eliminated almost all offensive deterrence capabilities and instead will rely solely on defense capabilities of disaggression, maneuver, and reconstitution, the most costly, the slowest, and ultimately the most fragile architect selection. So they want to reverse the Biden administration defense posture right off the bat. Number one, reestablish offensive capabilities to guarantee favorable balance of forces, efficiently manage the full deterrent spectrum, and seriously complicate enemy calculations of a successful first strike against the U.S. space assets. Maybe don't have secrets stored at Mar-a-Lago. Maybe. Number two, restore architectural balance in the U.S. Space Forces, both offensive and defensive, to restore deterrence dominance efficiently and quickly. Number three, rapidly expand space control capability to include cislunar. Oh, it's okay to use cis here? Oh, I thought we weren't ever using that word. Cislunar space, the region beginning at the geosynchronous altitude and encompassing the moon, to provide early warning of an enemy attack. Okay. 4. Seek arms control and the rules of the road understanding only when they are unambiguously in the interest of the U.S. and its allies and prohibit their unilateral implementation. Reduce overclassification. The USF must move beyond the Cold War era culture of secrecy and overclassification that's around military space to facilitate greater coordination and synchronization of efforts across the government and commercial sectors. No, I'm not giving him more nukes. No. I declassified that. It's in space. No, absolutely not. Declassify appropriate information about terrestrials on orbit space capabilities that threaten the U.S. space constellation, as well as those being pursued by our competitors to secure the principled right to counter them offensively. So apparently they want to, unalive E.T. Okay, look. Implement policies suited to mature USSF. No longer a newborn, the USSF has entered its fourth year of existence. The lessons learned can be incorporated across all facets of the force to increase its effectiveness. Number 1, restructure from the current unity effort structure to the unity of command. So effort to command. Number 2, lead the U.S. government development of clear and an unambiguous declaratory policy that the United States will operate in the space and enforce these operations with capabilities that ensure effective deterrence and the ability to impose our will if necessary. Number 3, end the current study phase of concept development and issue necessary guidance for the development of fielding offensive capabilities. Number 4, alter the Space Development Agency's current fail early approach and transition to a methodology that maintains aggressive timelines but with significantly greater engineering rigor, with special attention to sustainment support and a fully integrated space operation. Number 5, increase the number of general officer positions to ensure that Space Force's ability to compete for resources on a common basis with other services. So you want more general officer positions in Space Force, nowhere else? Okay. Explore creation of Space Force Academy to attract top aero-astro students, engineers, and scientists, and develop astronauts. The academy could be attached initially to a larger existing research university like California Institute of Technology or MIT, share faculty and funding, and eventually be built separately to be on par with other service academies. I'm going to stop that right there. Because, as Charlie motherfucking Kirk always says, I'm not going to fly on a plane if there is a black pilot. So what you mean is like Christo-fascist white, because there are so many qualified individuals, and for Charlie Kirk to even say that is offensive. So when you talk about aero-astro students, it must be all-inclusive. They're going to call it DEI. I'm going to call it the best of the best. So if Charlie won't even fly on a plane by a black female pilot, how the hell you're just going to be like, oh, well, we need to attract more. Well, how are you going to attract more when you've got systemic racism rooted at the issue of the cause anyway? Like, make that make sense. U.S. Cyber Command. U.S. Cybercom was established in 2010 by the Department of Defense to unify the direction of cyberspace operations, strengthen DoD cyberspace capabilities, and integrate and enhance the U.S. cyber expertise. Cyber capabilities and threats are evolving rapidly. Accordingly, a conservative administration should be especially sensitive to and be prepared to meet the challenges presented by bureaucratic silos, inappropriately rigid technical doctrine, and strategic thinking historic tendency to lag behind in technological capability. A lot of this just sounds like tax breaks. Who? Tax breaks where? The preliminary evidence from the war in Ukraine suggests that cyber doctrine and certain capability and target assumptions may be incorrect or misplaced. The following recommendations, therefore, presuppose that there will be a rigorous lesson learned analysis and review of existing U.S. doctrine in light of battlefield evidence. Here's where they're going to talk shit about Ukraine, and while they'll say that this is the experiment that we had, and because of Ukraine, we did. No. Needed reforms. Ensure that U.S. Cybercom is properly focused. Mission creep is leading to wasteful overlap with the Department of Homeland Security, National Security Agency, Department of Defense, and Central Intelligence Agency. Number 1, separate U.S. Cybercom from the National Security Agency per congressional direction. Separate it? Number 2, conduct effective offensive cyber effects operations at the tactical and strategic levels. Number 3, expand defensive cyber effects operations authorized by former, I'm not saying it, former President Trump's classified national security presidential memorandum 13, United States Cyber Operations Policy. And number 4, end U.S. Cybercom's participation in efforts to fortify U.S. elections to eliminate the perception that the DOD is engaging in partisan politics. The fuck? So, participation in federal efforts to fortify U.S. elections to eliminate the perception that the DOD is engaging in partisan politics. Anything for election it was rigged. If anybody should be thinking this, we're like, where do those IP addresses come in with quote unquote the deep state that you're referring to? Those Russian bots, maybe? Increase U.S. Cybercom's effectiveness. Accelerate the integration of cyber and electric warfare EW doctrine and capabilities, abiding by time-tested norms of combined arms warfare. Number 2, mandate that development teams will include both coders and soldiers, aircrew and sailors with kinetic experience at the platoon level. Number 3, break the paradigm of cyber authorities held at the strategic level. Number 4, increase cyber resilience by, for example, protecting the nuclear command control and communicating networks of the Air Force Cyber Resiliency Office of Weapons Systems, the CROWSs. Number 5, expand coordinations of joint operations with allies. Number 6, implement the Government Accountability Office recommendation that the DoD Chief Information Officer, Commander of U.S. Cybercom, and Commander of Joint Force Headquarters DoD Information Network to align policy and system requirements to enable the DoD to have enterprise-wide visibility of cyber incident reporting to support tactical, strategic, and military strategies for response. Use commas, use punctuation. Rationalize strategy and doctrine. Number 1, update the October 2022 National Security Strategy to define DoD roles and responsibilities beyond existing platitudes. Number 2, apply traditional deterrence strategies for principles for using cyber EW in retaliation for foreign cyber attacks and or EU actions against U.S. infrastructure and citizens. So that was U.S. Cybercom. Now we're talking about Special Operation Forces. Even though America's conventional war in Afghanistan was a failure, Special Operations Forces in the United States Special Operations Command, USSOCOM, executed an extremely effective counterterrorism campaign. There has not been another major attack on homeland. Global terrorist threats are reduced and managed. Collaboration with international partners is effective, and units under USSOCOM are the most capable and experienced warfighters in 2 generations. There is a movement to reduce the scope of the scale of the USSOCOM's mission in favor of other service priorities and the power of competition. This would be a mistake because USSOCOM USOCOM can be employed effectively in great power competition. It makes sense to capitalize on USOCOM's experience and repurpose its mission to include irregular warfare within the context of great power competition, thereby providing a robust organization that is capable of achieving strategic effects that are critical to both our national defense and the defense of our allies and partners around the globe. Irregular warfare should be used proactively to prevent state and non-state actors from negatively affecting U.S. policies and objectives while simultaneously strengthening our regional partnerships. If we maintain irregular warfare traditional focus on non-state actors, we limit ourselves to addressing only the symptoms, non-state actors, not the problems themselves. China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. Needed reforms. Make irregular warfare a cornerstone of security strategy. The U.S. can project strength through unified action of our interagency allies and partners by utilizing irregular warfare capabilities synchronized with elements of national power. Broadly redefining irregular warfare to address current state and non-state actors is critical to countering irregular threats that range from Chinese use of economic warfare to Russian disinformation to Islamist terrorism. A broad definition of irregular warfare in the national security strategy would allow for whole-of-government approach, thereby providing resources and capabilities to counter threats and ultimately serve as credible deterrents in strategic and tactical levels. Number 1. Define irregular warfare as a means by which the United States uses all elements of national power to project influence abroad and counter state adversaries, defeat hostile non-state actors, deter wider conflict, and maintain peace in great power competition. Number 2, characterize the state and non-state irregular threats facing the U.S. by the region of the national security strategy. Number 3, direct that irregular warfare resources, capabilities, and strategies be incorporated directly into the overall defense strategy instead of being related to a supporting document. Number 4, establish an irregular warfare center of excellence to help the DoD train, equip, and organize to conduct irregular warfare as a core competency across the spectrum of competition, crisis, and conflict. Counter China's Belt and Road initiative of the BRI globally. DoD, in conjunction with interagency allies, partners, and nations, must work proactively to counter China's BRI around the globe. Task USSOCOM and corresponding organizations of the Pentagon with conceptualizing, resourcing, and executing regionally based operations to counter the BRI with forces and focus on the nations that are key to our energy policy, international supply chains, and our defense industrial base. Number 2, use regional and global information operations to highlight Chinese violations of exclusive economic zones, violations of human rights, and coercion along Chinese fault lines in the I will not be able to pronounce this. I apologize. Xinjiang province, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, in addition to China's weaponization of sovereign debt. Number 3, directly encounter Chinese economic power with all elements of national power in North America, Central America, and the Caribbean to maintain maritime freedom of movement and protect the digital infrastructure of nations in the region. Establish credible deterrence through irregular warfare to protect the homeland. A whole-of-government approach and willingness to employ cyber, information, economic, and counterterrorism irregular warfare capabilities should be utilized to protect the homeland. Number 1, include the designation of the USSOCOM as the lead of execution of irregular warfare against hostile state of non-state actors and national defense strategy. Number 2, demonstrate a willingness to employ offensive cyber capabilities against adversaries who conduct cyber attacks against U.S. infrastructure, business, personnel, and governments. Number 3, employ a Oh, this is some shit. Number 3, employ a name and shame. I got to remember that one. Employ a name and shame approach by making information regarding the names of entities that target democratic processes and international norms available in a transparent manner. Name and shame. Snitches get stitches. Number 4, work with interagency to employ economic warfare, lawfare, and diplomatic pressure against hostile state and non-state actors. Number 5, maintain the authorities necessary for an aggressive counterterrorism posture against threats to the homeland. Okay. Now we're going to talk about nuclear deterrence. Nuclear deterrence is one of the most critical elements of the U.S. national security as it forms a backstop to the U.S. military forces. Every operational plan relies on the assumption that the nuclear deterrence holds. Ever since the U.S. first acquired nuclear weapons, administrations of both parties have pursued a strategy designed to deter nuclear and non-nuclear attacks, assure allies, and in the event of nuclear employment, restore deterrence at the lowest possible cost to the U.S. Today, however, America's ability to meet these goals is increasingly challenged by the growing nuclear threat posed by our adversaries and those giving away our secrets. I'm just drag, refresh. You. It's telling me for some reason that it can't refresh this whatever image is to maintain my live. It says drag the puzzle paste. There can't complete verification. Hello. Why is that weird? We have detected inactivity during your current live. Complete the verification to continue your current live. Well, I'm trying, and there's nothing to refresh. Report a problem. Let's see what's going now. No image has been shown. It's going to end my live for whatever reason. So let me end it really quick because for whatever reason, it's just going to end it anyway. Well, this is some bullshit. Couldn't load image, refresh, try again. Yeah, well, I'm trying and you're not allowing it. So let me see if it's probably just going to end it in 3 minutes. Why is it doing this? That's so crazy. Can't refresh. I can't pull up an image. Refresh. I can't pull up an image. Okay, somehow it was like paused. Why is this? I don't know why it's doing that, but apparently that's crazy. Okay, let's go back to reading. We were on nuclear deterrence before it stopped. It says it's resumed, but let me see. Swipe left to close. Maybe that's better. I don't have any idea why, and then my face is a little too large there. Okay. Nuclear deterrence. I'll just start at that whole thing again. Nuclear deterrence is one of the most critical elements of the U.S. national security as it forms the backstop to the U.S. military forces. Every operational plan relies on the assumption that the nuclear deterrence holds. Ever since the U.S. first acquired nuclear weapons, administrators of both parties have pursued strategies to deter nuclear and non-nuclear attacks. We assure allies, in the event of nuclear employment, restore deterrence at the lowest possible cost to the U.S. Today, however, America's ability to meet these goals is increasingly challenged by the growing nuclear threats posed by our adversaries and our former presidents. Yep. So again, guys, I don't know why that was trying to ask me that I was still active and live. It's like when Netflix is like, are you still watching? I'm like, yes, bitch, I'm still watching. I'm still binging. That's what I'm doing. And it wouldn't give me there's like a puzzle piece you have to do, like swipe your finger. It's like there was no image. It wouldn't allow me to reload. So here we are. China is pursuing a strategic breakout of its nuclear forces, significantly shifting the nuclear balance and forcing the U.S. to learn how to deter two nuclear peer competitors, China and Russia, simultaneously for the first time in history. Russia is expanding its nuclear arsenal and using the threat of nuclear employment as a coercive tactic on its war in Ukraine. North Korea is advancing its nuclear capabilities, and Iran is inching closer to nuclear capability. So ask yourself why the former is involved with any of these. Meanwhile, all U.S. nuclear capabilities and the infrastructure on which they rely date from the Cold War and are in dire need of replacement. The next administration will need to focus on continuing the effort to modernize the nuclear triad while updating our strategy and capabilities to meet challenges presented by a more threatening nuclear environment. And stop giving documents to Donnie. Oh, that's not in there. That's just me. Needed reforms. Prioritize nuclear modernization. All components of the nuclear triad are far beyond the intended lifetimes and will need to be replaced over the next decade. This effort is required for the U.S. to maintain its nuclear triad and will be the bare minimum needed to maintain U.S. strategic nuclear deterrence. Number 1, accelerate the timelines of critical modernization programs, including the Sentinel missile, the Long-Range Standoff Weapon, the LRSO, Columbia-class ballistic submarine, B-21 bomber, and F-35 dual-capable aircraft. Number 2, reject any congressional proposals that would further extend the service life of U.S. capabilities such as Minuteman III ICBM. Feel like that's the talking point. Again, I am not 100% versed on anything military, but rejecting any congressional proposals that would further extend the service lives of U.S. capabilities such as the Minuteman III ICBM, that just sounds... I'll have to look that one up. I'm not going to lie. Number 3, ensure sufficient funding for Warhead Life Extension Programs, the LEP, including the B-61-12, the W-80-4, the W-87-1 MOD, and the W-88 Alt-370. Develop the Sea-Launched Cruise Missile Nuclear, the SLCM-N. In 2018, the Trump administration proposed restoring the SLCM-N to help fill a growing gap in the U.S. non-strategic capabilities and improve deterrence against limited nuclear attacks. The Biden administration canceled this program in its 2022 Nuclear Posture Review, the NPR. The next president should support and accelerate funding for the development of the SLCM-N with the goal of deployment by the end of the decade. Account for China's nuclear expansion. To ensure its ability to deter both Russia and the growing Chinese nuclear threat, the U.S. will need more than the bare minimum of nuclear modernization. President Biden's 2022 NPR described the problem but proposed no recommendations to restore or maintain nuclear deterrence. Number 1, consider procuring more modernized nuclear systems, such as a Sentinel missile or the LRSO that is currently planned. Number 2, improve the ability of the U.S. to utilize the Triad's upload capacity in case of crisis. Number 3, review what capabilities in addition to the SLCM-N, for example, non-strategic weapons or new warhead designs, are needed to deter the unique Chinese threat. Restore the nuclear infrastructure. The United States must restore its necessary nuclear infrastructure so that it is capable of producing and maintaining nuclear weapons. Number 1, accelerate the effort to restore plutonium pit production, which is essential for both modern warhead programs and for recapitalizing the stockpile. Oh, hell no. I do not want to give a conservative, namely Trump, here, we need some more plutonium. We've all watched Back to the Future, no? Yeah, we've seen what happens. Yeah, I don't really want to give Donnie any more. You know what I mean? Like, no thanks. Number 2, continue to invest in rebuilding infrastructure, including facilities at the national laboratories that support nuclear weapons development. Number 3, restore readiness to test nuclear weapons at the Nevada National Security Site to ensure the ability of the U.S. respond quickly to asymmetric technology surprises. Correctly orient arms control. The U.S. should agree to arms control agreements only if they are to help advance the interests of the U.S. and its allies. Number 1, reject proposals for nuclear disarmament that are contrary to the goal of bolstering deterrence. Number 2, pursue arms control as a way to secure the national security interests of the U.S. and its allies rather than an end in itself. Number 3, prepare to compete in order to secure U.S. interests should arms control efforts continue to fail. Now on to missile defense. Missile defense is a critical component of the U.S. national security architecture. It can help deter attacks by instilling doubt that an attack will work as intended, take adversary cheap shots off the table, and limit the perceived value of missiles as tools of coercion. It also allows space for diplomacy during crisis and can protect U.S. and allied forces, critical assets, and population if deterrence fails. Adversaries are relying increasingly on missiles to achieve their aims. China and Russia, in addition to their vast and growing ballistic missile inventories, are deploying new hypersonic glide vehicles and investing in new ground-launched, air-launched, and sea-launched cruise missiles that uniquely challenge the United States in different domains. North Korea has pursued aggressive missile testing and is becoming increasingly belligerent towards South Korea and Japan. Iran continues to maintain a missile arsenal that it's capable of striking the U.S. and its allied assets in the Middle East and Europe, and its rocket launches demonstrate that it either has or is developing the ability to build ICBMs. Missile defense has been under-prioritized and underfunded in recent years. In light of these growing threats, the incoming administration should treat missile defense as top priority. Needed reforms. Champion the benefit of missile defense. Despite its deterrence and damage limitation benefit, opponents argue incorrectly that the U.S. missile defense is destabilizing because it threatens Russia and Chinese counterstrike second capabilities. Number 1, reject claims made by the left that missile defense is destabilizing while acknowledging that Russia and China are developing their own advanced missile defense system. No, this is a partisan issue. Number 2, commit to keeping homeland missile defense off the table in any arms control negotiation with Russia and China. Can you make sure Trump knows that? Strengthen homeland ballistic missile defense. The United States currently deploys 44 ground-based interceptor GBIs as a part of its ground-based mid-course defense GMD system to defend the homeland against North Korea. But as North Korea improves its missile programs, the system is at risk of falling and failing behind in that threat. Number 1, buy at least 64 of the next generation interceptors, the NGIs, which is more advanced than the GBI, for an eventual uniform fleet of interceptors. The Biden administration currently plans to only buy 20, so it wants to buy 44 more NGIs because they're more advanced than the GBIs. 2, consider additional steps to strengthen the GMD systems, such as layered missile defense or a third interceptor site on the East Coast. I don't want any more keys on nukes. Increase the development of regional missile defense. As the Ukraine conflict amplified demonstrates, U.S. regional missile defense capabilities are very limited. The United States has been unable to supply our partners reliability with any capabilities, and the number of type of regional missiles defense platforms are less than the U.S. needs for its own defense. The U.S. should prioritize procurement of more regional defense systems, such as Theater High Altitude Area Defense, THAAD, Standard Missiles 3, and Patriot missiles. Change the U.S. missile defense policy. Historically, the U.S. has chosen to rely solely on the deterrence to address Russian and Chinese ballistic missile threat to the homeland and to use homeland missile defense only against rogue nations. Number 1, abandon the existing policy of not defending the homeland against Russia and Chinese ballistic missiles and focus on how to improve defense as the Russian and Chinese missile threat increase at an unprecedented rate. Number 2, invest in future advanced missile defense technologies that are directed energy or space-based missile defense that could defend against more numerous missile threats. Word salad. Invest in new track and intercept capabilities. The event of hypersonic missiles and increased number of cruise missile arsenals by threat actors poses new challenges to our missile defense capabilities. Number 1, invest in a cruise missile defense of the homeland. Number 2, accelerate the program to deploy space-based sensors that can detect and track missiles flying on non-ballistic trajectories. Number 3, accelerate the glide phase interceptor, which is intended to counter hypersonic weapons. Okay, guys. So that was, and this is just the bibliography. Whew, that's a lot of bibliography. That's a lot of cited resources from all of these authors that work within actual conservative ranks. So, we did pages 108 through, I'm going to call it 132. So as you guys know, I don't do this on the weekends, but I will start up again on Monday. And when we start up again on Monday, we will be talking about the Department of Homeland Security. That page, that is, let me see how many pages of that. Because this is going to talk about, the Department of Homeland Security, they talk about wanting to defund it and restructure it. So that one, this is going to talk about immigration and ICE and U.S. Customs and Border Protections and the Office of the Secretary. This is going to be an interesting chapter, I believe, because of everything that we've seen play out so far. Because it's all about border, American first, border, deport, border. And here's what they're going to basically see. Oh. I'm not trying to give you like a little teaser here, but when we're talking about this, it talks about permanently authorize and make mandatory e-verify and end parole abuse by legislating specific parole standards. That's interesting. And then, because it's all going to tie into the budget. Unaccompanied minors, asylum reform, migrant protection tools, employment. Talks about everything they want to do to T visas and U visa reform and repeal TBS designations. Averting or curtailing a mass migration event, FEMA, cybersecurity. This is a big chapter. Agency relationships. But yeah, we're going to start on that on Monday. So again, guys, if you're listening here, this will be available later on tonight. I'll download it. I'm still on over here on Twitter Spaces doing live at the same time. You can watch it later on if you want to. And then hopefully this weekend I'll get through at least a summary or two and put that on the playlist here at TikTok. So, okay guys, we are, let me see if I'm going to show you how, we're through this much. So, we'll start on page 133, Department of Homeland Security, and the recommendations about what they require. Because this is going to tie into a lot of everything that we've seen about reform at the border, but again, they're talking about the southern border. They're not talking about Canada. So, I will leave you with that. I hope you have a great weekend. We will pick this up. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them, and I will see you guys later. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend.